The Adidas Boston 13 versus the Adidas Boston 12. What's new? What's the same? What's changed? And is it still the right shoe for you? This video is for you guys, those of you who loved this shoe, the Boston 12, and I know there's a ton of you out there, and you're looking at the new Boston 13 and you're trying to decide, is it worth the upgrade? Is there enough of a difference, or am I going to like this shoe better? That's what this video is for. In my review for this shoe, the Boston 13, I talked a lot about how this shoe is not the right tempo shoe for where Adizero seems to be headed. I'm not going to get into that in this video. If you want to get that story, go watch my review, link in the description. Instead, I'm really going to get into the weeds of what makes this shoe, the Boston 13, a really good update to this shoe, the Boston 12. And as always with my versus videos, let's start with the specs. And looking at the specs, this is where you can see that there isn't really that big of a change between these two shoes. There are two major changes in the Boston 13 over the Boston 12, but they're not in the specs. The stack heights are very similar, the drops are very similar, the real feel of the drops are very similar, the weights are very similar, though I will say the Boston 13 just feels a little bit heavier on foot and in hand. It's not, as you can see here, it's a very similar, if not the same weight. It just feels like a denser shoe, and I don't really know how to describe that any other way. It does feel slightly heavier, but not enough where it's going to be a totally different shoe. From a material standpoint, the uppers are still an engineered mesh, though one of the big changes to the Boston 13 is the upper, and I'll get to that in the upper section. But the midsole is fundamentally the same, to the point where it's the same foams, Lightstrike Pro Classic and Lightstrike foam. The difference in naming is that Lightstrike 2.0 that was in the Boston 12 is the same as Lightstrike foam that's in the Boston 13. Adidas just dropped the 2.0. And the ride profiles of these two shoes are similar. They're both very stiff, very firm, though I'm going to say the Boston 13 is even firmer, to the point where it's a brick to my feet, though not to everyone's feet. And from a geometry standpoint, these two shoes are pretty much identical. I don't think there's been any real changes. I do think the heel bevel in the 13 has slightly been refined a little bit, but the rocker point is around the ball of your foot or a little bit in front of the ball of your foot, depending on if you went up half a size or not in this shoe, which means this is going to feel slower and transition off the toe than, say, the Evo SL or even the Adios Pro 4. And for someone who's a heel striker or midfoot striker, you're going to really enjoy that. For us forefoot strikers, it's not really going to make a difference. Looking at the outsole and contact patch of these two shoes, cosmetically, there are big changes here, but from a geometry standpoint, they're kind of identical. The waist of the Boston 13 is a little bit narrower, and there is now that big medial midfoot cutout, which I know people who have flat arches do not like or are not fans of, but it seems to be a quintessential Adizero thing at this point. But the forefoot is essentially the same width, the heel is essentially the same width, though the Boston 13 is a little bit narrower, but again, you're not going to notice that. And from a outsole coverage standpoint, I think we can all agree that the outsole on the Boston 12 was spectacular. It was one of my favorite Adizero outsoles of that generation, and this is the 2023 generation. But I'm going to say the outsole on the Boston 13 I think is a upgrade. I think it's a better outsole, especially for road running. You get a combination of the new Light Traction CPU outsole, which is that rail that you see on the forefoot lateral side and the heel medial side, and then the gray areas are just Continental rubbers. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the feel and durability of the CPU Light Traction outsole where you need it, primarily on the lateral forefoot where you're landing. And then you get the grip and the traction of Continental outsole where you need it. So it's a really great combination. I've had no issues with grip. It's going to be way more durable, especially that light traction part on the lateral forefoot. Overall, I think it's a huge upgrade, though I know, again, that Boston 12 outsole was spectacular, but trust me, the Boston 13 outsole is that much better. Starting with the upper of these two shoes, this is probably the biggest change that most people are going to appreciate in the Boston 13. Now, the upper on the Boston 12 was an upper that even people who love this shoe didn't necessarily love. It was very much a more race-oriented Adizero upper, meaning it was very harsh on the foot, and in the Achilles area, it could really dig into your Achilles or provide a lot of heel lift, which then dug into your Achilles. This was just a very performance-oriented or almost race-oriented upper. The tongue was almost non-existent as well, so you could get a lot of lace bite in this shoe. Again, even those who love this shoe did not like the upper on this shoe, generally speaking. This is a vast improvement in the Boston 13 as far as the upper. Adidas has gone back and really improved the engineered mesh that's on here. It's much more open, it's much more compliant to the foot, and now there is padding around the ankle collar and the Achilles flare, which creates both a pocket to hold the heel in and gets rid of all that friction and rubbing on the Achilles. So if you had problems with heel hold down or just this shoe tearing apart your Achilles, this should work quite well. In fact, this is a very similar upper as far as design than what's on the Evo SL. So it's very much what I would consider a performance upper still, but it's somewhere between a training upper, which is just about comfort, and a race upper, which is just about performance. Kind of threads the needle between those two things, and I think it does it exceptionally well. And as far as fit and sizing of these two shoes, I'm going to say that the upper on the Boston 13 is, again, much better, but it's much lower volume. From a width standpoint, I think these are the same last, and I think they're using the same width in the forefoot. However, the Boston 13 is going to feel a little bit more narrow because there's less volume in the upper, especially around the base of the eyelet chain, and that makes a difference. Additionally, I think the Boston 12 is slightly longer. As you can maybe see here, the Boston 12 is a little bit more pointy. The toe box taper in this shoe is much more extreme than in the Boston 13. So the Boston 13 is a little bit shorter. So between the lower volume of the upper, which does give you a better fit, a much more performance-oriented fit, which I appreciate, and the slightly shorter length of this shoe, I'm going to say this. I went true to size in both of these. These are both US men's size 9, and I get a okay fit in this and a near perfect fit in this, the Boston 13. If your size is on the larger size of your size, I would consider going up half a size in the Boston 13 to get a similar fit as what you had in the Boston 12. If your foot size is on the lower end of your size, I would go true to size in the Boston 13. I think that's going to be the optimal fit. I really can't come up with a scenario where you'd want to go down half a size in the Boston 13. So true to size if you're on the smaller end of your size, up half a size if you're on the larger end of your size. Moving to the midsole of these two shoes, this is where essentially they are the same shoe. There is some slight changes to the geometry of the Lightstrike Pro foam in the Boston 13, which I'll get to in a second. But from a material standpoint, they're identical. They're both Lightstrike Pro under the foot. They're energy rods underneath that, and then Lightstrike foam under that. So it's the same foam sandwich. Now, there has been some confusion as to what version of Lightstrike Pro is in the Boston 13. A Adidas product manager gave 2 interviews on this shoe. And in the first one, she said, this is the same Lightstrike Pro that you find in the Boston 12. And in the other one, she said it's a slightly modified version of the foam that you get in the Boston 12. And then on the Run Repeat website, which I'll put a link to their review of this shoe in the description, they commented that the foam in the Boston 13 is actually the new Lightstrike Pro, the new Lightstrike Pro that's in the Adios Pro 4. Well, I don't actually think it is. I think what's going on here is that from a manufacturer standpoint, the Adidas has really, I think, optimized producing Lightstrike Pro foam. So the forming of the foam probably has a whole new process. Now, Lightstrike Pro Classic and new Lightstrike Pro, what you find in the Adios Pro 4, they're both supercritical TPE foams. There's no difference in the chemistry of the foams. And in the forming of the foams over the past 2 years, and this is what I mean by the manufacturer, I think Adidas has made optimizations. So the way they actually form the foams is probably different. So that's why when you look at this foam under a microscope with the foam next to it that's in the Adios Pro 4, that's why at a microscopic level, they probably look similar. Not the same to my eye, just similar because the forming process is the same. However, this very much is the feel of Lightstrike Pro Classic foam. meaning it's got that firmer, more springy ride. It doesn't have that softer, more bouncy ride of the new Lightstrike Pro. It's definitely the older Lightstrike Pro Classic foam, the same one you found in this shoe, the Boston 12. And that should make some runners quite happy, but I think that's ultimately the bigger problem with this and where it fits in the Adizero lineup. And again, if you want that full story, go watch my review of this, the Boston 13, link in the description. From an engineering standpoint, there is a change to the Lightstrike Pro part of the midsole, which you can kind of see here in these exploded views of these two shoes. Again, as you can see, it's the same general configuration that I walked through. Lightstrike Pro, energy rods, Lightstrike foam, then the outsole. However, there is now a lateral forefoot wing on the Boston 13 that wasn't on the Boston 12. And when I zoom in, you can kind of see that here. Let me outline it and then you can see it more directly. That wing that you can see on the side of this shoe, and it's very prominent when you look at the profile of the Boston 13, is actually Lightstrike Pro foam that's coming down to the ground. So when you're landing as a midfoot to forefoot striker on your lateral side, which is generally where you're going to land, technically you are landing on Lightstrike Pro foam, not Lightstrike foam. However, as you can see from the outsole, that red line is actually where the Lightstrike Pro foam stops. And as you can see, there's not much of it. It's about a 1/4 inch, maybe 5-6 mil. It's not a lot. So you're not actually getting any real feel of Lightstrike Pro foam when you're landing. You're actually really just landing on Lightstrike foam, which is what's making this shoe feel so kind of brick-like and so dead underfoot, because Lightstrike foam is just a very, frankly, not good foam. There's no resilience to it. Now, this general idea of putting this wing of Lightstrike Pro foam on that upper part of the midsole makes a lot of sense. And if Adidas would have just moved it over a bit and made that entire rail that you're actually landing on, the whole light traction part, as you can see, everything to the left of the red line, they made that all Lightstrike Pro, then this shoe would have a totally different ride. And that 13.8% more Lightstrike Pro foam that they talk a lot about in the marketing of this shoe would actually make sense, because now you would be getting the softness and the feel of Lightstrike Pro when you're landing, and then you would get the stability and the detuned effect of the Lightstrike foam for the rest of it, the stability of that foam. And this would be a much better optimization of this outsole, and you would actually feel a difference than what they actually implemented. But as they implemented it, it just doesn't make really any difference whatsoever. And there's another difference in the midsole of this shoe, and this is what I think actually makes the Boston 13 run a little bit firmer, a little bit more brick-like. And you can kind of see it here on the medial side. There is actually a few more millimeters of Lightstrike foam in the forefoot of this shoe than there is in this shoe. And it's hard to see, and I couldn't really get a good zoom of it, but look at the Lightstrike foam that's at the bottom of this shoe, right in this area, and look at it in this area. There's a few more mils here, and I think that makes a huge difference, because additionally, the Lightstrike foam that's in this shoe, the Boston 13, feels just a little bit more dense. It's not any more firm, it just feels denser for some reason. I don't know how to describe that any other way. This feels kind of light and airy. This feels kind of just dense to the touch. The Lightstrike Pro foam feels softer in this shoe, which is why I think some people are feeling a better step-in or a softer step-in feel to this shoe. But on the run, this shoe actually just feels firmer and harsher than the Boston 12 does. Minorly, but you do notice a difference. And again, I just think that comes down to the amount of Lightstrike foam that you're actually running on in the mid to forefoot of this shoe. And lastly, with the midsole, the Boston 13 now does have that medial midfoot cutout that is something that we see across all Adizero shoes, especially their tempo and race shoes. And while the Boston 12 did sort of have that cutout as well, it didn't go all the way through the midfoot. It just was this little gap or window that you could see the rods. In this one, they extended it all the way to the medial side, so you do get that bigger gap. Now, some people that have flatter arches or need a lot more arch support, I think it could be a little problematic in the Boston 13. But again, this shoe is so stiff and so firm. Again, I'm not saying that is a bad thing. If you like that in the Boston 12, there's more of it here. I actually don't see this midfoot medial cutout to be a huge problem in the shoe because it is so firm, it is so stiff. So it's something to consider. Definitely worth a try on if you're concerned about it, because this is a Boston 13. It should be available pretty much anywhere Adidas Adizero shoes are sold. This will not be a hard shoe to find, so you should be able to try it on. Moving to the ride of these two shoes, honestly, with all of those things I just pointed out in the midsole, there really isn't that big of a difference in the ride of these two shoes. The Boston 13 is a little firmer, a little stiffer, but again, if you like that in the Boston 12, you're going to love it just as much in the Boston 13, generally speaking. If you're someone who tried, say, the Evo SL and you found that shoe just way too unstable, just it caused a lot of problems with your ankle or your foot, this is going to be a very stable shoe. The benefit of the firmness and the stiffness of the Boston 13 is it is now a very, very stable shoe. And again, if you love that in the 12, you're going to love that in the 13. So looking at this shoe just as the Boston 13, I think it's a great shoe if you're looking for a firm, stiff, and stable ride. That's exactly what you're going to get here. As far as the way these shoes actually roll off the toe, I'm going to say that both of them are very similar. This is a shoe that you're not getting a lot of resilience out of the foams. Instead, what you're getting is propelling you forward from the stiffness overall of the platform. So the geometry between these two shoes is the same, if not identical, and you're getting that kind of smooth roll and pop off the toe because of the energy rods that are in this shoe. And as I said in the upfront, for heel strikers and midfoot strikers, this is going to be a little bit slower, a lot more controllable for you, not be as aggressive from a geometry standpoint as the Evo SL or even the Adios Pro 4. So this should suit heel strikers and midfoot strikers much better. For us forefoot strikers, we're kind of fine with anything because we're landing up here and we're flattening the whole thing out. This shoe's fine. It is a little harsh, but so is this one, again, because you're landing on a little bit more light strike foam in this shoe. But again, if you like that feel from the 12, you're going to love it in the 13. And if we put both of these shoes in my performance matrix, starting with the Boston 13, we get this, and with the Boston 12, we get that. Fundamentally, these are very similar. They're very similar shoes. I will say, because of the extra firmness and stiffness of the Boston 13, it is a little bit better for max effort. I found it just a little bit better for faster running, beyond threshold running, than the Boston 12 was. But on the other side of that, I don't think it's as good for easy running. Not that I think the Boston 12 was ever great for easy running. It's definitely the last shoe I'd probably pick for easy running. But I actually think the Boston 12 was just a little bit more comfortable for easy running. You can do that, especially if you like doing easy running in a stiff, firm shoe. But again, I think the Boston 13 is just a little bit better suited for faster running. But as you see from the red or orange area in this, the sweet spot is pretty much the same in these two shoes. It's in that steady into threshold range, which is what you would expect from a tempo shoe. And lastly, let's talk about the break-in of these two shoes. Now, I've run in a ton of Adizero shoes over the past few years, and I'm very familiar with the break-in period of a shoe. I will say both of these have about a 25 to 30K break-in range, meaning the materials soften up just a little bit and the insole or the top of the midsole molds to the bottom of your foot so the shoe feels more natural and connected to your foot as opposed to just on your foot. That's very common for this style Adizero shoe, which is the type of shoe that we've seen from Adizero for the past few years. Now, for all the people saying that you need to put 60 to 100K on this shoe to really break it in, I don't really buy that. I have almost 300K into this shoe, the Boston 12, and it really never changed from about 30K. But that's also one of the great things about this shoe is it's very consistent. I would expect the exact same from this shoe. Now, I do think the Boston 13 is a very good upgrade to the Boston 12. You're getting a better fitting upper, you're getting less problems in the Achilles and the heel area, and you're getting a much better outsole that's going to be more durable with fundamentally the same midsole. So this is the better shoe between these, and I do think it is worth the upgrade if you love the 12. However, if you really love the 12 and you can get a good deal on this and you can find colorways that you love, and there's plenty of them out there, there isn't that big of a fundamental difference between these two shoes. This one will be there. This will be a very common Adizero shoe to be able to find. You'll see sales of this shoe all over the place. I've already seen sales on this shoe and it's only been out for about a month. So this will be a shoe that will be there ready for you to upgrade to when you've run through this. But overall, you're going to get a very durable shoe that's firm, stiff, stable, and if that's what you want, the Boston 13 is the shoe for you. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, go check out sagasurunning.com for merch or click the join button to become a member of this channel and support what I do on a monthly basis. If neither one of those are good options for you, leave a comment, leave a like, because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.